In this lesson, we're going to continue to learn about appropriate requirements and components that need to be in place to ensure enforcement of IT security policy. And one thing to keep in mind is that in order to provide for appropriate security policy implementation, that a hierarchical organizational approach is typically going to provide the best avenue for allowing for an organization to be able to enforce policies in a consistent and thorough manner. And so a hierarchical approach for enforcing policies is typically going to be handled through a number of different committees. And these committees are called gateway committees. And so one thing to keep in mind is that it's important that the committees are overseen by executive management, and the executive management is able to provide for appropriate processes that can be utilized to review and evaluate the activity of appropriate technological and security policy standards. So this allows for approvals to be provided for projects or any type of activity within the organization, and it allows for executive management to review that activity before it proceeds to the next stage. And so with this in mind, it allows for a progression to occur. And this progression is going to be called a gateway. And so there are going to be different organizations and functions that are going to be involved. So specifically within a gateway, you will have different committees that are going to be involved. And the committees include a project committee. And a project committee is simply going to approve your project funding. It'll provide the various phases that are needed for the project, and it's going to outline the base requirements. Then you also will have your architecture review committee. An architecture review committee is basically going to review the necessary technologies and architectures that need to be utilized and make sure that they are meeting the required standards for the organization. An external connection committee is going to be utilized in order to ensure that any external data connections are secure and they are within the guidelines of the organization's security policy. Then we also have appropriate committees for vendor governance. And essentially what this will do is it'll evaluate vendors as well as provide oversight of vendors that have already been approved. And so with this in mind, it is making sure that if a new vendor comes into the organization as in any facet, that they are meeting the security policy standards for the organization. And then you're also going to have a security compliance committee. And the security compliance committee is going to be in place to ensure that the organization is in compliance with laws and as well as regulations. And the operational risk committee is going to provide appropriate risk and oversight for possible exposures for the business as well. And so these are a number of different committees that can be in place within an organization to provide enforcement of the IT security and security policies. And these committees will have a purview of all of the projects that will affect the organization, and having various eyes on those projects helps to ensure that appropriate standards are being met. And it's important to keep in mind that the committees have been set up and they operate based on charters, and the charters will essentially outline all of the goals that the committee has and what they will be focusing on. So there are also going to be various frontline managers that are going to be in place as well. And so the goal of frontline managers in this, when it comes to security policy enforcement, is to ensure that the established policies are being utilized, they're implemented appropriately, and that management is following them to the best of their ability for the safety of the organization. And so what this can mean is that you can have your frontline managers that are overseeing the day-to-day operations, that are helping to ensure that accountability and responsibility are in place. And these roles can include ensuring that everyone on the frontline team is going to be trained appropriately, that everyone is taking on a role as the appropriate go-to person for questions that occur, that policies are being utilized and applied consistently, that appropriate metrics that are going to be utilized for effectiveness are in place, and that everyone is following the policies as appropriately. And so with this in mind, the frontline managers and the supervisors will work together, not only working together, but also working with employees as well to ensure that they have a good understanding, that they're comfortable with the policies, and that they're putting security at the forefront. And so with this in mind, it's the frontline managers are important because they are the first point of contact for employees that have questions and concerns or need clarification about policies. And so with this in mind, it's important to consider that the frontline managers and the supervisors are going to be there. They are going to be held accountable for the actions of their employees, which is why it's important that they're there to ensure that the policies are not only enforced, but they're being followed appropriately. And so in addition to management, we also have our employees that play a key role in ensuring that IT security policies are being enforced. And so with our employees, we have to consider their job responsibilities and ensuring that they are able to execute those responsibilities under the guidance of the organization's security policy. So if employees have malicious intent within the organization, then this will more than likely mean that they're not going to be able to follow the policies appropriately. And so this could happen if an employee doesn't fully understand the policy or if it's inconvenient to them. And so it's important to have good employees in place to hold other employees accountable, have a coworker or partner that ensures that all of their coworkers are following guidelines appropriately. And so with this in mind, it's important to keep in mind that failure to adhere to policies can occur. Typically, it's because they don't understand the policy or it's inconvenient to them. So peer pressure is useful and it provides a grassroots enforcement method for ensuring that employees and their fellow employees are following the security policies. And rewards can also be a means of ensuring policy enforcement. And, rewards could be in the form of appropriate incentives to ensure that everyone is up to date on their cybersecurity and security policy trainings as well. And so it's important to keep in mind that the policies will continue to be updated as the business changes, and it requires more attention to some of the security mechanisms in place. And so as these changes occur, it's important that there's a grassroots effort in place amongst employees to hold each other accountable. And it's also important to keep in mind that in order to hold employees and other stakeholders accountable, that an organization has a right to monitor the user actions and traffic within their organization and within their purview. And this can apply to not only management and executives and employees, but also vendors and guests and anyone that essentially has access to the resources of that organization. And so the prevailing view is that employers do have the right to monitor the activities of any workers or anyone using systems that's connected to their network. And so this doesn't mean that it's going to create a watchdog policy to oversee all employees. Our organization needs that because the Electronic Communication Privacy Act already allows for employers to monitor employees in the ordinary course of business. And so there are a number of reasons that it's important to monitor a worker's computer activities and their digital footprint. And some of the reasons for encouraging this is that it helps to foster a productive workforce and work environment. It allows for the detection of abnormalities or deviations from the security policies that are in place. It allows for sensitive data to be maintained and secured appropriately within the organization. It also helps to ensure that the organization's reputation is intact when it comes to ensuring that quality and protection were there. And it also helps to avoid the liability of pirated or intellectual property or software, et cetera, that could put the organization at risk. So it's important that employers understand that the computers are the property of the organization and they have the right to any information that may be contained on those devices. So this can be very true when we're dealing with employees that are using resources such as laptops or mobile devices. And so an acceptable use policy is typically going to help to shape how employees will use those devices. And so there are going to be different areas that need to be monitored to ensure consistency. And so to minimize any actions that might be negligent to the organization, there are going to be specific areas associated with devices that the organization is going to want to focus on. And of course, those three main areas of monitoring employees' usage includes internet usage. Internet usage could be making sure that employees are only being able to monitor and access very specific websites that are appropriate for the work that they have to do on behalf of the organization. And specifically, it's to ensure that sites related to that may be obscene or not related to the day-to-day function of the business are not being used or visited. And so this allows for monitoring internet use allows for the identification of unauthorized access to sites such as subscription-only services, or even entertainment sites that don't have to do with the day-to-day business operations of the organization. When it comes to email use is going to be monitored, and the main caveat with email use is to ensure that viruses and malware do not penetrate the system or the organization. Companies will want to be sure that they monitor email usage to ensure that there is protection against possibility of data leaks or sensitive information related to the organization or any of the clients or employees. Specifically, data leak protection should be in place so that to ensure that large files are not going to be accessed within the network. And as well, computer usage as well is also important. Just like with email usage, you want to ensure that viruses and malware do not have access to appropriate systems. And so with these protections in place, this can help to ensure that risk or minimize for the organization. And again, this goes back to ensuring that employees and management are serving as the front line to ensure that any type of risk or threats are minimized for the organization. Another important thing to take into consideration is with compliance law, is it what determines if it's a requirement or if it's just a part of risk management. And so when it comes to implementing strong security policies, you'll want to ensure that they comply and are in guidance with appropriate regulatory requirements. And so this can be ensuring that regulators, when they look at the organization's policies, that they're able to assess that the policies conform to expected guidance for the industry. So essentially, a regulator is going to want to ensure that core requirements are being met and that those requirements are being achieved within the purview of the organization's guidelines. And so although regulators they have the ability to interpret legal language, at a minimum, an organization should be in compliance with the minimal standards. So it's important to keep in mind that the legal department is going to be a key stakeholder in being able to create security policies. That you'll want to ensure that there is an establishment and a risk management program that is in place. And the risk management program is going to ensure that appropriate policies are being enforced. And these policies are there, and regulators will have evidence that the policies are in place to help manage and reduce risk, as well as prevent any breaches or security incidents within the organization.